It is question time now. If you do have a question, please raise your hand and someone from CEDA will bring a microphone to you. But while we're waiting for questions from the audience, Treasurer, perhaps I can start. In your speech today, you talked about past reform agendas and what they've delivered, and you've described them as one-off, and they are very sort of economic in nature, I guess, in terms of how the community perceives them. Yep. The issues that you're talking about today, health, education, delivery of non-government services, all of these things no doubt matter importantly to people, and they would understand them in that context. How do we get the message across about their importance from a productivity perspective and as a genuine economic reform agenda? And how do we overcome concerns that ultimately this is just going to be about penny pinching and working teachers and healthcare workers harder?
Well, I think the first step we've just taken, I think, to have the respected institution of the Productivity Commission without any indication from the government or any steer from the government about where they should have come back to us. I mean, this has been the product of their efforts. They have come to these conclusions. I mean, Peter Harris is like I'm sure many others in the room, and some who aren't. People like Professor Hilmer and others. I mean, they were part of a reform rat pack over those years. They can all decide which one was Frank Sinatra and all the rest, but Tony Bennett and so on. But it's the same guys, and thankfully there's more women part of this debate today as well than there was back then. An obvious example. And it is about evolving it as an economic agenda. I mean, I haven't got up here today to talk about a new inclusion agenda. That wasn't what I'm talking about a productivity agenda. And I think the way that, that these issues have been confined to an economic inclusion agenda in the past, I think has limited what their real value is. And from a Liberal national perspective, we're coming at this quite differently from our political opponents. This isn't about social justice, this is about more and better paid jobs, because I think that's actually the best justice for anyone. And I think that is shared by my colleagues. This is about lifting living standards. And we think that's the best way to improve people's lives. I'm not trying to settle scores in health and education as some sort of social justice wars. I'm just trying to lift people's wages. And it's a very practical, common sense conclusion. This is not the product of ideology, it's the product of economics. And the economics say pretty clearly people who are healthier and better equipped through the education system are going to do better.
Thank you.
Hello, Ken Morrison.
Hi, Ken.
I'll just shout. Ken Morrison, Property Council Australia. Thanks very much for your address, Treasurer, and the Commission and piece of work. I'm interested to see you position cities on this agenda, and the government's done a lot in this area, including your housing affordability package in the budget. So I'm interested if you could unpack a little bit about what some of the bigger issues or the longer term issues that the PC is recommending the government to look at.
Well, I outlined them in the presentation and they're contained in the report. But a key part of it is dealing with how congestion builds up within cities, and that goes to better planning, better anticipating infrastructure needs, not just building and planning for today, but actually building infrastructure systems for the future. How public investment decisions are informed and then executed. How regulation impedes sclerotically the ability of the market to respond to deliver on future infrastructure needs. I mean, one of the things that the Prime Minister and I and the team have done on infrastructure, working closely with Paul Fletcher and Angus Taylor and Darren Chester, has been for the Commonwealth not to be a passive kick money out the door investor in our cities and in our infrastructure. We're involved. In Western Sydney Airport, we are running it. We are investing Commonwealth taxpayers' funds, and we are pursuing that as an owner or a proprietor would, a client would, as you'll know from your sector, to ensure we get the best result out of that infrastructure spend. In my time in the property industry, in your fine organisation many years ago, one of the things that really lifted, I think, the quality of investments in private investments in built infrastructure was that the clients got active. They got interested in the outcomes. They were more active in the contract process and in specifying the outcomes. And the government, as a big investor in public infrastructure, has to be an active client in that process. And that extends, if you're an active client, you care about the contracts that are being signed. You care if there are rorting going on the building site. And you have an interest to make sure you stamp it out. You don't just go, oh, well, that's all the contractor's issue. And that's why we were keen, before embarking on a $75 billion infrastructure plan, that we restored the Australian Building and the ABCC, the Corruption Commission. That's why we legislated to outlaw corrupt payments by businesses to unions. We don't want that stuff going on because it impedes the delivery of infrastructure in a built environment that makes our cities healthier.
Thank you. So a question on the left? No? We're waiting for more questions. Perhaps I can ask you, Treasurer, you spoke about the meeting you've got this Friday with your state counterparts. I've no doubt that the Productivity Commission Chairman and his team will be very compelling.
They will.
In their presentations and trying to get the states engaged. But I'm interested in your view on how you're going to engage with the states and bring them along as genuine participants in this agenda.
Well, this Friday we're not looking to sign off on the report. We're looking to be informed of the report and to discuss the direction. While there are specific recommendations in the report, you may have noticed I don't think I referred in my presentation to any single one of them, because what I've taken out of this report is the direction it suggests the country should move in and that Commonwealths and states should move in. So I don't take it as a set of prescriptions. I take it as some very deep insights that should inform where we are going as governments. And whether it's on health and education, Ministers Hunt and Birmingham will be more adroit at going through the detail of what they're delivering in their portfolio areas to go in this direction. But so many of the things we discuss there, because of the nature of our federation, require the engagement of the states to reflect on these findings and respond. Now, that's up for them to do that. I can't prescribe it for them. They have to think it through. They're all elected governments in their own right with their own perspectives. And I think one of the keys in the Commonwealth is in the federation to there has to be the give and take around legitimately elected governments coming from different perspectives. And we all do. But that's why you do set up independent processes. That's why you have a productivity commission who can just come and tell it to you straight. You may not want to do everything that's there for whatever reason, but the facts are the facts. The same with the National Energy Guarantee. I mean, the Energy Security Board was set up by COAG. The Productivity Commission here has said, listen to the experts, let them do their job and get on with it. Well, that's what the Energy Security Board has said. So it's time that we do just get on with it. And I'm really hopeful that this Friday, when we sit down as treasurers, Energy Minister's already had a discussion on this. There'll be many more, but I'm optimistic, as Josh Frydenberg and the Prime Minister is that once the dust settles, that I think the inherent wisdom in the National Energy Guarantee will be self-evident. And business has already made that very clear. And I would hope that everyone can put their swords down on this thing. The Australian public expect of us all. It's common sense, and I think we should just get on with it.
Question at the front here.
Hello. Hi, sorry, Kevin Keith from Consult Australia. Just wondering, you mentioned about road user charging. It's something we've advocated for some time. Technological change is changing the nature of that conversation. How difficult do you feel the political conversation will be with the public around some of these issues in terms of road user charging?
Really difficult would be my answer to that. Really difficult. But I think there are 2 points here that we can't avoid in the discussion. One, you've just highlighted. I mean, the conversation you can have about how those things are implemented today because of technological change are infinitely better than they were 10 years ago. The way to achieve it is just far less imposing and far more practical. I think that is giving us options that we never had before, which I think really probably did constrain how much progress you can make. And the other one is just the sheer revenue numbers. What is currently paying for the roads is a diminishing revenue base. And so that needs to be sorted out. I think sometimes there's also, we forget what we already are paying. I mean, $1,300 each to drive around Australia at the moment. I don't know if people know that, but that's what you're paying. Just in the taxes and charges and rego and so on. That doesn't include, the fuel and maintenance of your vehicle and all those sorts of things. So there is already a built-in road user charge right now. I think the question that Peter is posing is that the best way to collect that money, and that in the future that money will keep pace with the demands of consumers, and can we do it better? Because while he rightly says, look, it's covering it now, you can't be assured that's going to be the case in the future, and so that will mean changes potentially in other areas or changes in what service can be provided. I mean, that's just the practical observation. So I think it's difficult, but I think the information and the technology helps us deal with it better than we could in the past.
We've probably got time for one more quick question, if there's a question in the room. Vicky, Sherelle? Oh, sorry.
We need to, if you like. That's
All right. Thank you, Treasurer. Sorry, here first and then to you, Sherelle.
Anthony Willis from Matters. Good morning, Treasurer. Thank you for your comments. Just following through on the question of congestion, how important is decentralisation given the rise of Sydney and Melbourne compared to the rest of Australia? And what sensible steps can a Commonwealth government take to support decentralisation?
Well, as the Deputy Prime Minister has already acted, we already are decentralising, and that comes with movement of some major government agencies. One of the other great things we can do is continue to invest in regional Australia and see regional economies grow. I think one of the really interesting other pieces of work that the Commission has done, and there have been some very outstanding pieces, and I particularly make reference to the data work that was done on the data liberalisation, but in this area, it highlighted the diversity of what's happening in regional Australia. I think, for the majority of us who live in cities, and for those, and particularly in Sydney, Melbourne, sometimes the narrative we get on regional Australia is that it's a basket case, that globalisation and technological change has created this scorched earth beyond, the last lots of suburbia. It's not true. It's just not true at all. Go to Toowoomba, go to Tamworth, go to Bunbury, go to places where we're seeing the results of innovation, entrepreneurialism, taking up new trade opportunities, and the better prices and the better trade access is flowing through the main streets of these towns, and new investment is going in. So we want to see healthier regional economies, I think, because it provides a real alternative, not a forced alternative. I mean, there are things governments can do around decentralisation of particular government agencies. In my own agency, and now in Treasury, I've been pleased at the work that John Fraser has done is to move more Treasury officials out of Canberra and have them in some of our major financial centres. That has informed particularly our thinking on infrastructure investment, because they're in the market, they're engaging more frequently. And that's no reflection on being based in Canberra or anything like that. It's not. But you need the combination of these things. And I think decentralisation is if it's part of a general policy of reinforcing the growth and the diversity that we're creating in our regional economies, then that's a good thing. I think that's a really good thing.
So final question, Sherelle?
Sherelle Murphy from ANZ. The report, I think, has some fantastic suggestions which genuinely will, I think, raise wages in the long term as it raises labour productivity. The thing is, I guess, that your budget relies on wages rising quite quickly in the short term.
Oh, sorry, I didn't quite hear that.
Wages rising quite quickly in the short term. Do you think that any of these initiatives can actually lift wages quite quickly? And if not, how do you get to those wage estimates that you have in there?
Well, the wage forecasts and projections, remembering that the projections are in the last 2 years of the out years, the forecasts are in the first two, are at or just around long-term averages on wages growth in this country, so are returning to a longer-term performance average. So I don't think there's anything terribly remarkable about that. And even in the forecast that Deloitte's put out the other day, and what the RBA is saying, who don't go out as far as we do, we have seen no reason at this point to revise what we said in the budget. The budget is revised, of course, in the mid-year update, and that'll be done in December once we see those national accounts figures. that come through in early December. So at this point, the outlook, I think, is actually being reinforced. We are seeing the labour market contract more quickly than I think we had anticipated, and we've been revising down our unemployment forecasts as hours worked are up. And there are issues around inflation expectations and the lag coming out of the mining investment boom, which has pushed those wages sideways. But as you would have seen from that chart, which looked at the difference between producer and consumer wages, where they'd split apart for quite a period of time, they're coming back together. Now, what's important about that is that more recently, labour productivity has not been driving wages growth because of the hangover from the mining investment boom. And so those distortions are starting to work their way out through the system. And we would therefore anticipate that over the next 2, 3, 4 years, the distortion impact of the mining investment boom would have flown out of the system, and wages will then be more supported by labour productivity, which on international levels currently is pretty reasonable. But it hasn't been flowing through because of the washing out effect of the mining investment. I was in New York the week before last and in Washington for the IMF meetings. And while I also got there the incredible sense of revived optimism. I mean, I was there a year before at the same meetings, and it was like it was a different crew of people. The optimism about where the world economy is heading, particularly in the United States and Europe, is very encouraging. And there was an affirmation of the strength of what's happening in Asia, in particular in China. But at the same time, the point I was making when I was there is to understand the Australian economy is in the Northern Hemisphere they had the Great Recession and that sideswiped their economy. That didn't occur here, I would argue, because the strength of our banking and financial system, courtesy of some good management, certainly by those institutions, but also the very prudential regulation introduced by Peter Costello. But on top of that, what was of bigger impact to the Australian economy affecting wages was the disruptive effect of the mining investment boom. To understand what's been happening in the Australian economy, you need to look at that and its impact on the way up and what it did with exchange rates and what it did in redirecting where labour was going and where capital was going and what happened on the other side of that. It was an unusual time. We are moving more back into more usual times, and that, I think, changes where we see wages going beyond the most recent period.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Treasurer. I think everyone in the room appreciates that the release of this report is simply the start of things.
Sure.
And we look forward to following progress, and I certainly look forward to welcoming you back to the CEDA stage.
Sure.
To talk about progress as it emerges. In thanks, we've got a gift for you. Because you haven't done enough reading of late, here's another report for you to digest on service sector productivity.
Oh,
but
excellent.
thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Mary. Thank you. Good luck.